Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Khamisa, and if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get into the main event today, just a reminder, if you are on YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. If you're listening from Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other audio platform, make sure you subscribe there as well. And for those who would like to donate towards the podcast, you could do it in 4 ways. One way is through Cash App using our handle, $IDTALK4ED. Or you can go to Venmo, where we use our handle @KwameSM, PayPal, using the URL paypal.me/Kwame. And then for my day ones who have been listening to the podcast from the beginning and been with us over the past 5 years, you can go on Patreon and become a patron today, where you'll get exclusive perks and behind the scenes content on all things Identity Talk. So this is for those who know what Identity Talk is and know what to expect from us. So those are your 4 ways to donate. Make sure you choose one. And then to catch past or future episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at IDTALK4EDucators.com. And in less than a month, Learn to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culture-Affirming Classroom, my new book, is coming out. And I couldn't be more thrilled. We've already been getting a lot of pre-orders from folks. So thank you for those who have already pre-ordered a copy. Thank you for folks who have reached out to me about how to get bulk orders for their school, university, or district. It's been a surreal experience, and I've yet to put my hands on the book. So I can't even imagine what that feeling is going to be like in the next few weeks. But for right now, if you haven't pre-ordered your copy, please go to Amazon to get your order. You could also go to the Rutledge website to get a copy of the book as well. And to learn more about the book and get access to some free learning resources, you can go to the book's website at learningtorelearn.com. So make sure you all do that. All right. So this is a special episode. Today's guest is somebody who I've had the pleasure of collaborating with on a number of different projects through AIELOC. She is someone who has a tremendous story, which I believe people need to hear. I've been really encouraging her to come on this podcast for some time, and she finally said, yes, I want to come on today to share my story and my life and things that I'm doing right now. And I greatly appreciate her for being so brave as to do that, because if I'm not mistaken, this is probably her first podcast ever. So we're going to make sure we give her a warm welcome, whether you're listening or watching. And I want to go ahead and bring on my good friend Khamisa to the podcast to talk with us about her life, her work, and what she's doing right now. So let's bring Khamisa on. Hello.
Hello, Kwame.
How are we doing?
We're doing good. A little nervous, but I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and like I told everybody, we've been trying to get this thing going for some months now, and I knew you needed some time to get your feet wet and everything. So I really appreciate you for coming on and sharing your story today. Hey, we're twinning. Look at us.
Yes, it wasn't planned at all. We're matching really good.
All right, well, listen, it goes well with the background, and I think it's a good sign that we're going to be in for a pretty good conversation. So let's go ahead and get started. Usually I ask my guests how they came into this field that we love, education. But I want to give you a chance to share a little bit about your upbringing and those early years of your life.
Well, as my story is quite long, so I'll try to shorten it just a bit. For starter, my name is Khamisa Haugen. I was born Happiness Khamisa. And later on, my name changed from Happiness Khamisa to Joy Paul. That is around the time we migrated to the US, so that a little bit later on. So my name that was given to me at birth, which is Khamisa. So that is what a lot of people in the last few years have gotten to know me as. I was born in South Sudan, in Juba, actually, right during the war. I'm one of those children who was born when there is a conflict that's happening. So things weren't already safe for anyone at all, or let alone children. So from Juba, my family migrated to the northern part of Sudan. We stayed in Khartoum for a while. And then from there, being the eldest child in my culture, you're often shipped around to help the grandparents. So because my grandparents were back in South Sudan when the war intensified, they then flee into northern Uganda in a refugee camp. So when my mother found out that her mom is in a refugee camp with no support to help her, I was then the eldest child that was sent at the age of 6 to northern Uganda from Khartoum to go help my grandmother in the refugee camp. So that is where some of the hardship started for me that I'm able to remember in the refugee camp. So I lived in a refugee camp in northern Uganda from age 6 up until age 12. I went to my start of my school in a refugee camp. Nowadays in international school, they do a week without wall. My literal early stages of education is in a classroom without a wall, just literally a tree and then a blackboard and then a teacher and a chalkboard. So that's how my schooling started up until grade 6 or 7. And then I migrated to Nairobi at the age of 12 because my mother was seeking asylum. To where we don't know, you often don't know where you will end up when you are seeking an asylum. But I was lucky enough to get to Nairobi on time to be able to complete the process of asylum, the medical checkups, the interview, all the things that goes along with being able to migrate or be accepted to migrate to the countries that people are going to. So we moved to the United States when I was around 13. And that is right at the start of high school for me with life in the United States. And then, yeah, I think that's where I will leave for now. I think we can touch on the rest as we go along.
So when you arrived at the United States, you arrived in the Twin Cities, correct?
Yes, you don't get to choose where you end up when you are seeking an asylum. It's usually the person that signed you a document from the other end of the country. Whichever city, states they live in is where you end up. So the person that signed our documents lived in Minneapolis, and that is where we ended up migrating to.
Yeah, there's been a whole Minneapolis thread happening in the past few episodes. I had some past that had a connection to Minneapolis. Matter of fact, it was Dr. Darnell Fine.
Yes, very well.
He was born in Minneapolis, so I didn't even know that until I had my interview with him. So shout out to Dr. Darnell Fine. But this will be a good place to ask this question. So you're going from South Sudan to Uganda to Kenya. You eventually get to the United States. So thinking about those early years as you're growing up, how did those experiences help to shape your perspective of what home meant to you?
As somebody who constantly was on the move growing up, home is not really, to me, the way I look. There are different ways I look at home, and it's changed over time. So, of course, there's the physical home where my mother currently lives, which is in Minneapolis. And then there's home that we have in Uganda. And then there's home that we have in South Sudan. And then there's my home where I live with my husband and children here in Singapore. But to me, the concept of home is not necessarily the physical one, but it is a place where you feel safe, right? Where there's security, because my early upbringing, there's not much security being a refugee. So I really look at home as a place where you feel safe, where you feel like you belong, you are respected, you're valued, and you're well loved. It's one place where you can be your fully authentic self without any fear of having to sort of remain in the background. You can be your full self. I can walk around with my hair, carry my afro the way it is. Like, that is to me home. And I can switch from different language to different language depending on which family member, because all of us who grew up in the African culture, we speak several languages, and we tend to like trans-language between different languages depending who we are talking to. So to me, home is, it's very different depending who I'm talking to and who's asking the question. But in this regard, to me, home means a place where you can be your full self and feel safe.
And I know when you make that big of a move, it's a culture shock many times. And you have to figure out ways to not assimilate, but get acclimated into a new culture while still trying to maintain the culture that you grew up with. So as you are starting high school now in the States, I'm curious to know if there were any internal or external struggles that you were dealing with as far as being able to show up as your full self, given those early life experiences you had.
I mean, yes, in many levels. I mean, that period as a 13 going on 14-year-old, there you're already dealing with so much, right? In terms of hormonal changes, but then now adding the culture shock. And we arrive around snow time too. So that was that. But I definitely did experience both internal and external struggle with embracing my identity, right? And showing up as my full authentic self in a lot of cases. And then there's that navigating the cultural differences. I have to navigate how I behave when I am at school. And also I have to alter how I behave when I am at home, because at home I have to maintain what I was brought up with and what my mother, who was a single mother, expect me to carry on in terms of what she and my grandmother taught me at a younger age. But then there's that when you are in a school setting, you can't quite be your full self. You have to sort of assimilate, sort of code switch, be a different person to try to fit in. Otherwise, you stand out so much that it makes you become a target of people's bad joke. It makes you stand out not in a positive way. So you try to assimilate and do your very best to try to navigate that environment, to try to also fit in with your peers and try to be part of the place you are now living in. And externally and internally, my accent, my appearance, everything about me is different. And the school I was attending was all pretty much white. So nobody there really understand me or try to understand me. And the school also did not have any systems in place to try to support students like myself or to try to understand where I'm coming from. I was given few nicknames: the refugee girl, the girl from Kenya, the girl from Uganda, the girl from all these different names that people are signing because they don't want to fully get to know you properly. And teachers weren't doing really much either. I think because there's lack of training for them to try to make people like myself feel we are welcome in the school and also give us resources to try to understand this new environment, because my school was completely different to where I was. And the only place where I felt safe and I felt like I'm able to express myself a little bit better was my ESL class, because the teacher was so welcoming and was so inviting. I wasn't the only refugee in that ESL class. There were some students from Ukraine, there were students from Russia, there were students from different countries in Eastern Europe that were in class with us. And our ESL teacher made sure that we had the experiential learning by bringing food so we can learn about the American food, by taking us out of the classroom, physically go out into public to try to learn how to navigate. So I really thought that was really something that she was giving us to try to learn by experiencing life in real time instead of looking at it through book or learning it from her directly. So that was one place I felt very safe. But in a lot of the places, I felt the teachers were very, very inexperienced in how to incorporate or how to try to make space where people like myself could feel as though they are part of the community.
Now, when you look at your experience in that ESL classroom, would you say that it was a precursor to what you ultimately end up doing internationally? Just thinking back to that moment.
I think now, yes, I think now how I operate as an educator is by sort of being that teacher or that adult in a school setting that I did not have growing up or when I was in the States and when I was struggling. And in the roles that I've held in international school, especially being a boarding house parent to students from different cultural background, I definitely try to use the way how my ESL teacher tried to really bring me in and try to like explain how the current place that I am in, how life works at that place. I try to be that to the students that were entrusted to be in my boarding house family. So yeah, I think it does have a lot to do with my early experiences in the States. Just what I didn't experience, what I wish I had, is what I am trying to make sure that I bring to place that I work, whether that is with colleagues or with students in general.
Awesome. So you go from Minnesota and then you eventually get to Singapore, where you've been for a very long time. So tell us what led to you moving from Minnesota to Singapore. How did that happen?
So my husband in training went to school to become a teacher. Unlike myself, my undergrad is in international studies with sociology minor. My intention was to make sure that I finished my undergrad and then go back to South Sudan to go work with UN, because what a lot of my friends that I grew up with back in Uganda were doing. Most of them are working with NGOs, whether in Uganda or back in South Sudan. And that was my intention, was to go back. And after graduating, I did go back to South Sudan for a little bit and I worked for UNDP. I did some work in the procurement department where we look at contractors who are coming into South Sudan. They're putting in bids to come build roads, rebuild the schools and hospital and stuff like that. But that wasn't really my aspiration of why I wanted to do a UN work. I wanted to be on the ground where I'm needed, working with women, working with children, just making difference on the ground, not in an office. So that wasn't really what I wanted. But because of safety reasons, I was told I would never be able to be in the field for various reasons. I'm a woman, there's that safety aspect, and also there's many other components of safety there as well. So that was a short-lived time in South Sudan. And then when my boyfriend at the time and I were like, we need to choose one place. He was in Mexico, I was in South Sudan. It wasn't working out really good. So when I came back to the States, we needed to sort of choose one place where we would go. And then Singapore was one of those places. And from then on, from 2012 up to now, we've been in Singapore. And that's how I ended up at the school here in Singapore and ended up doing role of service learning, handling the global concerns projects, which work with NGOs that relates to my educational undergrad background. So I was really happy doing that role. And then later on, I moved into a boarding house parent for a number of years.
And it was around that time when we connected. You were doing that job. And we're not even going to go into details on what transpired there because that's the past. Mm-hmm. But I know there are some things that really got you thinking about what your career trajectory is going to be from that point. And you discovered therapy, doing mental health therapy, psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, all these different layers, which is what you do now. So my question for you is, based on your experiences in the places where you've worked in Singapore, what do you believe is the intersection between mental health and work, which is something that we've been stressing a lot in our international schools? Where do you see that connection?
I mean, they both aim to, foster an environment where individual can feel seen, valued, and supported, right? In my experience, mental health therapy helps us process the internal experiences, especially that impact us by the systematic inequities that exist, right? And I feel that the DEIJ element of it addresses the external factors that affect those experiences, like, for example, experiencing discrimination, right? Exclusion or marginalization or being other. Those things have a huge impact on us. And that is when mental health therapy can come in and help in bringing the awareness of how to navigate so that you don't crumble while you are still trying to really be your true self in that environment, right? I feel that if we can address, like, work together to address the systematic inequities, at the same time, recognize that the reason why mental health support is needed is because the system is in place is not benefiting the whole community. And because it's not benefiting the whole community, some marginalized staff and students, literally everybody in the school setting who experience this thing and who try to talk about it, often get gaslighted or they receive defensiveness. They're not receiving support or validation. Instead, they're receiving the other, which then exacerbate the whole experience even worse than a person was already feeling. There's no space for you to safely express the inequities that you're experiencing at the space that you live and work. And to me, that impact the learning of the students. If I am not being fully myself and exercising the creativity that I know I have, I am not really doing justice to the students in front of me, to the students I'm interacting with, because I am not being my full self. Now, if there's space for me to process that, if there's space for me to express that in where it's met with support, with understanding and acknowledgement that, okay, yes, this system is not working for all. How about we work together in making sure we put policies in place so that it aims to bring in those who are not feeling that the system is working for them. Let's talk to those. What system is missing? How can we support you? Rather than pointing finger and being that, oh, you are just not able to adjust to this environment. That is like differences in our perspective, in our understanding, or that you are not really flexible in your way to try to work within the existing system, right? You then become that problematic person automatically. When you are coming from a place of not judging the individual that you are talking to that is in a leadership position, but you are trying to address the missing policy, the missing pieces that is preventing you from doing your job fully. But that is a long-winded way of me trying to explain that these two things go hand in hand. And I think it's both needed in a school setting specifically, because if you have culturally responsive teachers, culturally responsive counselors who can address issues from a trauma-informed in understanding that there are systematic inequities in place that is making this student come to me, it's making this staff come to me, it's making why some certain staff are louder, expressing frustration about things that are not working for them, and people being open to listen, not to respond, listen. Right. Listen with curiosity, with understanding, with compassion, with empathy. I think we will have such wonderful community where everybody can thrive, not just the dominant culture, but people with marginalized identity can thrive as well, because they will feel that they're able to be the authentic self and able to express if something is not working for them.
And that's the part that gets me curious, but also confused, because every international school I know has a child protection and safeguarding policy. So if you have that, by default, you should be doing DEIJ, because it's all intertwined. So to try to silo these different concepts is just senseless. It doesn't make sense at all, as you've mentioned with that example. Now, I know for the two of us, we come from African cultures where you're not supposed to express your feelings. You're supposed to bury your traumatic experiences somewhere in your bodies so that no one knows about them. That's just part of the cultures we've come from. So I'm wondering for you, how did you discover the power of therapy in your life? How did you come to discover the benefits of mental health given our context?
Yeah, a long journey. It's still ongoing journey, to be honest.
For sure.
Yeah, so like mental health is not something that is widely accepted within my community, and I see many there substance abuse, that is people dealing with unaddressed trauma. There is addiction issues that exist within my community. There is obviously domestic abuse happening, and all those things all stems from unaddressed trauma. Now, having come from South Sudan, where most of us grew up during the war, and that include our parents, our grandparents, they grew up during the war. They've never really experienced a sense of peace. And trauma can show up in so many ways in our body. And we handle them in our own ways, in different ways. So the fact that we are talking about our emotions and talking about our feeling is seen as something that is weak, is something that I myself struggled with, because the focus for me was on just being resilient. And I was looking at resilience as not showing emotions, not showing what I am truly feeling. And that's how you survive, right? Not by just being emotionally out there and outpouring what you're feeling in the inside. And my journey towards discovering the power of therapy, it didn't start until, to be honest, I would say in Singapore, because by default in supporting students as a boarding house parent, you go through a lot of training in child safeguarding and in like accidental counseling, and learning about these different ways and understanding the different background that students come from and some of the ways how you can talk about students' well-being with them was around that. So through that, I was slowly reflecting back to my own childhood and a lot of the repressed traumatic experiences that I've held. But that has never truly impacted me negatively, to be honest. But what really impacted me very negatively was experiencing inequity trauma that relates to inequity in international school, and where people are so confident in telling you in outwardly or overtly or covertly you don't belong. Whether that, oh, you are not a teacher. Even though I work in a school setting, the number of time I think I will be quite rich if I can save money on how many times I was reminded that I am not a teacher. Yes, I am not in front of the classroom providing lesson. But as a person, anybody that is on a school ground, in my perspective, is an educator. Whether that is the cleaner, the janitor, everybody from all the way to the canteen staff to the support staff, everybody is contributing to the learning of students. Everybody is an educator. So I didn't understand that. So that slowly, what I didn't know was that was slowly eating away my confidence. It was dehumanizing me. It was reducing my worth to the point where I started to see myself through the lens of how others see me, right? And like devaluing my worth. And that can slowly eat at your self-worth, your self-esteem, your overall well-being. And what is worse is when you, as a person with marginalized identity, and you already know that this space is not created for you. You already know that.
Come on.
And when you try to upscale yourself in that environment, right? You have this enthusiasm for learning, for wanting to do PD. There was restriction on PDs that I can do because I am not a teacher. I am not purview to some PDs that could upscale me. Right? If you upskill somebody that is enthusiastic about wanting to learn more, that wanting to learn more so that they can contribute in an even bigger way to the community, why not invest in those? Why not upscale those people who have that enthusiasm to learn, right? But that was not my experience. I never got PD in one role that I was in. I got plenty of PD in boarding. I think that is because I had to work with students directly, and that helped me a lot. But in a lot of the time, a lot of my colleagues who are considered support staff didn't have access to the PD that could upscale them. That would be beneficial to the community at all. And to me,
You
that
open up a
is...
can of worms. You realize that. You open up a can of worms. But go ahead, because it's important.
But that was some of the experience that I had in international school, that aside from not being looked at as a teacher and being denied access to PD. And when this is an example that I will give out there, I was seeking, after 6 years of being at the school I was at, I was seeking an opportunity to do some substitute because I was aspiring to be a classroom teacher. I was hoping I could, being with the background in international relations, perhaps I could do geography or some global politics classes. So I was seeking opportunity to do some substitute in those courses. So I was approved in some divisions of school. And then one division I went to ask for permission, knowing I've been approved in the other ones, I was shut down at the other division because I was told I didn't have a teaching certificate. Mind you, if I knew that was the criteria to be a sub, I wouldn't go boldly ask for opportunity to sub. But because after 6 years, having institutional knowledge, understanding the students, having great relationship with the students, with my colleagues, I felt safe to go ask for this. And to be told that, oh, we can't have you in a classroom because when parents find out, it is going to cause a lot of issues. Now, what the individual did not know was, I know several sub, including full-time teaching staff,
They probably got no cert
certificate. And I was so shocked that I couldn't even say it. I just said that there are teachers. This is now I'm going to bring in race, who did not look like me. That's how I was looking through it, the lens of. I don't know what the person on the receiving end was looking through the lens of, what lens they were looking through, but the lens I was looking at the whole situation was through my identity. Now, the colleagues I know are all of dominant culture. And then here's me going to ask for opportunity and shut down. And then what message does that send to me? That if we have you in front of classroom, parents will be upset. And because you don't have a teaching certificate, upon me reminding and letting them know that actually I know people. And the most shocking response was I was asked to give the names of those individuals that I know that did not have teaching certificate.
What? Come on.
I mean, all I had to say was I did not come here to call out anybody because I wasn't aware that this is a criteria, because if it was, I wouldn't obviously be so bold in coming and asking for opportunity. At that time, I was already doing certification courses. I started my certification courses. So I just felt that this would help me understand my classes better, being in the classroom. So that was a shock. That was the beginning, some of the shocking stuff that have led me to ultimately leave the environment I was at.
Yeah.
Just to start with.
There's so much there. I mean, the fact that you were at this institution for almost a decade, just to give people context, between doing service learning coordinating, being a boarding house parent, you had to earn your stripes in that space. And as you mentioned, you had institutional knowledge. You knew the school up and down. You had relationships with students. You probably knew a good number of the parents just for the long amount of time you were there. And for them not to account for all of that and give you a pass and say, what, Khamisa, we're going to go ahead and give you some opportunities here because we know how valuable of a person you are in this space. See, the fact that they wouldn't even give you that kind of grace lets you that it probably wasn't the place of belonging for you to begin with. But to have to come to that epiphany years later, I know it had to have hurt. It had to have hurt. And there are so many stories that I hear about this same scenario. I've had so many guests come on, and it's been Black women throughout the diaspora, women from the continent, women from the Caribbean, women from the Americas. Same thing, that marginalization, that dehumanization, and the way they've shared their stories, it lets you how many ways it can be manifested. So to hear that from you, it doesn't surprise me. Like, I could have finished your sentences for you because I knew it was coming. That's how often it happens.
Yeah. And that is what ultimately led to the journey. Just to go back to your original point, is what led to the mental health to really lead to that. Because those small doses of experience, just that example, plus many other ones, led to my mental health deteriorating so badly, to the point where I would have panic attacks in certain places, or when I see certain people who have had those sort of experiences with, right? And when you talk about those things with people, the response you get is not of compassion or empathy, right? Most oftentimes, well, why don't you leave, right? If you're so unhappy here, why don't you leave? I mean, if it's that easy, I would really leave. But I have family to think about. I've children in school. My husband is here. Like, there's so many different factors that is in there that you can't just make an impulsive decision to remove, because you oftentimes we feel like we can make a difference. All this time while you're experiencing this thing, it's not like you are laying low. You are actively out there trying to advocate for change. And that in itself is very exhausting and draining mentally. And I didn't understand how I can live life in a refugee camp, struggle through the lack of resources in a refugee camp, like the limited education, medical, and all those other things. I feel like would have given me more trauma. Somehow, the experience I had at that school, the experience that relates to discrimination, to exclusion, to a sense of being the problematic person in an environment where you are trying to make a positive impact, has caused a lot of mental health related issues to me. The number of times I am feeling constantly sick, constantly having panic attack, and avoiding places, avoiding people, and trying to minimize my visibility as much as possible. And I didn't understand what was happening to me at all until I started seeing a therapy. And then I was explicitly told that that is what you're experiencing is trauma that relates to your identity, to what you are experiencing. Because I was downplaying what was happening to me at the time, and I was comparing it to growing up in a refugee camp and hardship. I was thinking that that is more higher than the experience I was having in international school. But my person that I was talking to was very easy to let me know, quick to let me know that no, what you're experiencing right now, it is a huge course of your mental deterioration. If you stay at that place, it is literally going to cost you your life.
Wow.
So that was the time where, through many assessment, where I was then diagnosed with PTSD related to the experience there. Biggest had a very unpleasant experience with somebody in a leadership position. And that is ultimately what really took me out. and led to the diagnosis of the PTSD. Now, the journey of finding the right therapy was also another thing. Finding somebody who could point out this is a racial thing and not try to treat it as a you thing was a journey in itself. And the person of color was the person that was able to articulate to me, this is what you're having. And it clicked to me because I was downplaying what was happening to me and I was not seeing it for what it is. After I started seeing it for what it is when I took control of the situation and started talking and naming things when it is happening with people. Wow. And that did not help the situation, but it helped me because I was no longer putting other people's comfort over mine. I was prioritizing my comfort. I was speaking my piece, my voice, the way I wanted to, compared to the prior me before discovering what was happening with me internally after seeing a therapist to bring forth what was happening to me. So that is the power of therapy.
Yeah, everything that you just said. And as someone that's gone through therapy myself, the one thing that I've learned through this journey is the power of reframing. You have to reframe those past experiences that have led to the trauma that you've had throughout your life. In my case, it was dealing with my childhood trauma, dealing with the issues that I had with my father, coming to a place of forgiveness as a way to bring closure to what I've been experiencing for years, decades. And that's when that you have the power to own that experience and move forward. That's not to say that the hurt ultimately goes away. It's still there, but at least you have the language and you have the framing to understand why it happened. And I think for you, given those early years, being a refugee, having to go from country to country, having to make adjustments culturally in different places you've been in, you came to that point where you now can own those experiences and make sense of where you are now because you see why it happened. But it wouldn't have happened if you didn't do the therapy, if you didn't seek somebody. And for me, it was a Black woman who helped me to point that out. It was a Black man who I get life coaching from to this because they can relate to it in a way that no one else can. And that's why it's so imperative, as you mentioned, to find a therapist who can really relate to you culturally. And that's not to say that there aren't any good white therapists out there, because there are. But there's something about having a Black therapist that just adds a different layer to your experience, because they can tap into different parts of your soul that no one else can. And that's a fact.
100%.
Yeah.
I saw trauma as something that I need to suppress. Like at first, as I said, like I was really suppressing everything. No, it can't be me. Like I'm not acknowledging it or seeing it for what it is. Diving deep into mental health professionally and personally has helped me see trauma as part of me, right? And it shapes how I move now. It shapes how I support others. It shapes how I see students. Not that to say that I see students as like everybody, like as people who are walking with trauma, but it helps me understand certain behaviors in them because you really don't know. It's not like it's visible. If you don't take the time to really see students and to try to be curious about certain things that you're seeing with them and ask questions from a place of curiosity and not judgment, you will never find out what it is going on. And by asking questions, by being curious, you will see that there's deeper things that is causing this external behavior that you are seeing in front of you. And that is something that I find nobody really has, me growing up, nobody has taken time to do that. And if we all really take the time to try to understand the students in front of us, our colleagues, I think we'll all be better off seeing things from a trauma-informed lens instead of judging something from our own experiences that is limited to only you, not the person that you are around, not the students that are in front of you.
Yes. And this will probably be a good place to land this conversation as we come to a close. So I want to ask you this question. And I switched it up a little bit just for you, Khamisa. All right, because you know you the sister, so I had to switch it up
Okay.
for you. So usually I ask my guests, how do you stay true to the teacher in you? But given that you are here and blessing us with your presence, I want to make a slight adjustment and ask you, how do you stay true to the therapist in you when you're doing this work with clients? How do you stay true to yourself?
Well, as an educator first, I stay true to myself in both fields, in both areas, whether I would be in a school setting or in therapy session, by remaining a lifelong learner, because you can't just remain with what you learn. You have to continuously learn. There's more research out there that helps inform our practice, informed our journey of being a therapist or of educators. Just taking opportunity to take on PD that really like pique your interest in the area that would help shape your work is something that how I stay true, just to continue to be a learner, to continue to be curious, and just openness to growth overall. I just oftentimes I do a lot of PD. I get comments like, where do you find the time to always like do these 3 hour classes? Like, why do you often do that? My husband will tell me like, you've done the number of PDs you've done is like you should have PhD at the age of right now. But I just feel that like I just enjoy learning anything that will help my growth, whether it's for my own personal growth or whether for my professional growth, so that I can be the best therapist, the best educator for my students or for my clients. I will take that opportunity. And I try to stay grounded to the core values that my grandmother, my amazing single mom, raised me with. Just being empathetic to people around me and continuing to be an advocate for students, continue to be an advocate for refugee, continue to be an advocate for DEIJ related stuff. Whether I am in a school setting or I am in a counseling room, I remain committed to creating a space where students or clients can be themselves, can express themselves how they want to, and can then thrive in their own personal life. So I try to do that, to just be me and to try to remain my full authentic self. And it was a long journey to get here, but I am very glad to be where I am today.
And the journey continues.
It will always continue. It never ends. If it ends, we'll all be great, but it's a continuous thing. And we should all continue to improve and learn and be curious and have compassion.
Yes, so important, so important. Khamisa, you are awesome. You're like a pro. I don't know if you realize that. You need to do this more often. I think the audience will agree with me when they listen to this episode on playback for those who are missing out on this. But listen, I thank you so much for coming on. I know it took some time for us to get here, but listen, I'm proud of you. You shared your story. You were poised. You came with the fire today. So thank you so much. And before you leave, this is important. We try and get you some clients. Let people know how they can connect with you on social media so they can learn more about the work you're doing. And also, you are currently, if I'm not mistaken, seeking clients for your practice. So let them know how they can connect with you, because there's some people who could use your support right now.
Yes. So currently the best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn. If you search Khamisa Haugen, you will find my profile there. And through LinkedIn, there's a booking link under my profile, so you can book anytime. If you just want to connect and touch base to learn about what services I offer and my style of counseling, happy to chat with you. But if you want to go straight away and book a time for therapy, I am also happy. For those who are in Singapore, I'll be happy to do in person as well, if you would like, because that is, if I'm doing hypnotherapy, I need to do that in person. But otherwise, for the other modality, I'm happy to meet with you on Zoom or whichever platform is easier for you from the region where you are. I currently have client in Kenya. I have client in Sudan, in South Sudan, and in the States. So like really, if we can work up a time, I'm happy to meet people.
All right, yo. Y'all heard her. She's ready to work with you. She's ready to connect. So make sure you all make that connection online. Khamisa, thank you again. And on behalf of Khamisa, I want to wish everybody a good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.